Hello. Thank you for joining us today. Just seeing some people filtering into the webinar. Cracking. Perfect. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I apologize in advance if you hear any sort of drilling or hammering. I think my downstairs neighbor seems to be rebuilding his ceiling, which happens to be my floor. So I'm very sorry if that does come across the mic, but hopefully I've soundproofed things enough over here to make sure that's not an issue. So today's, cracking, seeing more people flooding in. Great. Today's webinar, we are going to be talking about security awareness at home, how security awareness is going to have changed during the pandemic, during lockdown, and with the shift in focus of our companies of how we adapt to this new way of working. And my name is Simon Fraser. I'm the Managing Director of Hut6. And we, during this time of lockdown, has been taking the opportunity to refocus our internal practices and how we are securing ourselves. And part of that has been launching this webinar series, which addresses how our solution can work best for our clients and share some of the expertise we've gained from its delivery and training and tracking and testing people's behaviors across security awareness. So during the session, you're all muted by default, but if you do have a question, there's a Q&A, which I'll be referring to, and anytime something pops up to you, just whack that in the Q&A section. I'll get round to it, and we can open the discussion up to the floor. I hope this should be, I've planned about sort of 20 minutes or so, and then we can open up the discussion to the floor. So over our 4-year journey as a company, we've worked with lots of different types of organization to convince their users to change their behavior. And in each of those journeys, we've had to address, but only often as a minor policy, home working or out of office scenarios. And as part of a security awareness narrative, that's the part where there's a lot of reliance on human behavior and not so much on the technical and physical infrastructure of an office. And historically, we've thought of those moments as the exposure to bad actors outside the bounds of the office. And employees can be on heightened vigilance as they're traveling. They have objectives in mind, and they're in a sort of slightly different, less relaxed environment than the office where you're in situ and you feel protected. But currently, out of the office become the norm. And for some people, it will continue to be. And the reality is with security that people are not so vigilant when they are relaxed in their homes, where networks are unsecure or devices are communal, things don't get lost, they just get borrowed. And for a lot of organizations, this is going to be new. And what I want to do briefly at the beginning of this webinar is to frame the problem, looking at what organizations are experiencing right now for both the companies and the people that constitute them. And if we can answer the question then of how we adapt the security awareness campaign to suit that audience, and then we can move on to which risks are the greatest, what awareness topics we should leverage to combat them. And finally, the divisive question of should you be running phishing simulations now when there is a concern around where people's emotions are and how they are sensitive in terms of, you know, whether or not it's a gotcha moment or a good training opportunity. So I'm going to stop sharing that contents agenda now as we work our way through it. Cracking. So as a result of COVID-19, many organizations, as I'm sure you are finding themselves transitioning to work from home. And in some cases, I know the ONS did a study recently focusing on home working opportunities and how much of the workforce was remote, but it means that some organizations lack the policies, technology, and training to secure their newly remote workforce. And I know we're now 3 months into it and people are getting comfortable, and this is a very good opportunity now to think about what else can we be doing to protect ourselves now that we've got a lot of our workforce back on their feet, so to say. But the people themselves, they may be unfamiliar or uncomfortable with the idea of working from home. 3 months is a long time, it drags out, it has effects on their emotions. And they'll be in an environment that wasn't initially designed for work, and that every employee is going through something unique during this lockdown experience. They might have a large household, a small household, they might be alone, they might have pets, kids who are out of school. And this frame of working is further disrupted by the turmoil from news and social media, not only about the pandemic, but also other political and systemic issues that the planet's facing. And so suddenly, as security awareness professionals, or as a member of an organization who wants to help increase the culture that organization has in terms of its security positioning, we need to remind ourselves that the audience we're talking to has different concerns and different nuances that need to be applied, as they are not simply working from home, but they are uprooted and they've been forced to be in their homes for their own safety. I think it was something like, from the ONS report I mentioned, 5% of the workforce was at home full-time in December 2019. And during the period of March and April, it was reported 48% of workforce was at home now, which means a huge change in the way we interact with each other. And the deviation to remote working means organizations are opening up their traditional corporate boundaries to bad actors. The attack surface has been significantly increased to home networks, to new devices, new people with physical access to those devices, and employees are not often in that secure shell. They might not have the same structure or close command of their team around them. So there's going to be stress. There's going to be new attack vectors, as well as the internal teams of IT, security, comms, struggling for bandwidth and user attention to guide people through this change, to get the organization fully operational again, and in your cases, to protect the staff and make them aware of security issues that are newly relevant and potent. There is also reason to consider this as an opportunity when it comes to protecting people and when it comes to mitigating human risk. The current state of affairs isn't all bad news. Firstly, when we are communicating to our teams, and so when you're delivering security awareness training content or any sort of comms, content can be less polished and is often praised for its authenticity, for the sort of the empathy you can communicate, and the relevance are the first priorities that people have when reviewing content or consuming content. And a lot more people have more time on the internet, more time with looking at videos, looking at news articles. And the underlying message here is that as a comms campaign, security awareness programs can get away with more direct and less, they don't need to be as shiny as long as they are intelligently thought out. Then undoubtedly as well, many people who are in lockdown have learned new skills. So your previously non-technical staff who you may have despaired at, maybe in an IT function, when the repeated question of turn it back on, turn it back off, turn it off, turn it on again, solves a lot of issues. People are either becoming more technically reliant, self-reliant on themselves, or they have had to learn new ways of doing video conferencing, functioning over remote working solutions like Teams, like Slack, and also often setting up a virtual private network or having closer monitoring of their device and taking ownership of their office space and their desk and their internet setup. So there is suddenly a trigger for change that you can jump on the back of and leverage those lessons learned in an awareness context. People are also having more internal conversations with their families. This is something we've seen from some of our users who are saying, who like our content and will share it back. And some of the feedback we get is, oh, I've shared this with my family to help protect them. A non-contentious topic like security awareness might have some legs around the dinner table or around the sofa, especially when people are in closer contact with those around them without much to talk about, to be honest. For example, a password manager might be a tip shared, and that can be part of an awareness campaign that you are encouraging people to talk to their families about how they protect their data, how they sanitize their home environment. And as awareness professionals as well, there's a key, we all operate on metrics. We all operate on how do I measure user behavior and whether or not training is working, whether or not my risks are being mitigated. The metrics have shifted. So there's no longer an auditable office space where you can do a desk check and an ID badge check and look at physical security and those other tangible security awareness metrics. Instead, there needs to be a refocus when we're home working on what is measurable and what is exactly, how can you know whether you're having impact with your awareness campaign if you can't see or have those clear lines of communication. And we've recommended during these times that we focus on the important risks that have the greatest impact. So you'll have a minimized bandwidth. So you need to make sure that you're prioritizing the human risks that matter the most to you, but also that you can measure additional things like the fact that people have more control over their local environment. You can create checklists that they're able to fill out themselves of have they secured their Wi-Fi connection, have they secured their personal devices. And all of these are a starting point, but it's the fact that people are outside the office isn't the death of aspects of your security awareness campaign, but instead you need to mute those whilst people have this tunnel vision of working from home. And as they emerge into the new normal, you should realize that the more behaviors and processes that we require of our teams and our people, the less that they can implement. So we need to definitely, one of the messages from this webinar will be refine exactly what you need to tell people, as they'll have limited bandwidth. And as always, everything that you implement in a security awareness campaign should be a reflection of your wider ethics and culture. So not all the risks and solutions will be applicable to you, as every company has a different reality. But what we will establish here is what steps do you need to take when looking at your security awareness program to make it work at home. So the solution there, that's what the state of affairs is. How do we now move into what an awareness program should look like? Well, step one, we've emerged from is assessing existing policies and guidance for employees. So what are the exact set of policies that you have right now around devices, around access to the internet, accessing the corporate network, using email, and do they all are they all fit for purpose? And I'm sure they are. But what corners might have had to be cut to be relaxed? What rules might have had to been relaxed to get people working quickly from home as you pivot from that into lockdown? And then if those rules that were relaxed at the time haven't followed through into a full into the awareness program and letting people know and establishing what they need, communicate to them what has changed, then that will be a good place to start doing a gap analysis of what new risks there are and what policy and what existing policies have not been fully adapted yet. Some rules remain the same and some may need reiterating, as in what devices you use for work and what networks you connect over. And I think that's the first step there, is that transparency is key. So it needs to be a full audit of what policies have been put in front of people on short bases will need to be done across IT, security and comms, knowing what people have been told and when they're working from home, what devices they should be using, as well as where they can report things. That'll be a bit of a structure that's been upheaved in security awareness. Is how do we do incident reporting? How do we track what people feel they have to do? The second step is then to revisit the security awareness plan for 2020. So what security behaviors and risks did you and your team originally plan to focus on this year, and are they still relevant? So for example, there may have been a push on social engineering and tailgating. There are elements of social engineering that are still very relevant, and even have increased more so. For example, over the phone calls to vulnerable relatives asking for support, or other COVID scams we've seen from people impersonating government around tax issues. And so those are still relevant, but you should be careful of not using your awareness bandwidth, communications bandwidth, on topics that don't immediately resonate with your audience, because that audience is possibly in a shared kitchen office with a dog and child and some TV in the background. You're going to have to deliver something that resonates and draws action and gets people to do things, as changing behavior is about what actions people take, not about what they ultimately know. And it's whether or not they implement those things. So pick your battles and refine what your security awareness plan is going to look like. In some cases, as we spoke about policies earlier, it may be that security behaviors have changed. So whilst the out of office tutorial or policy may have been refrained from talking about confidential work in public places or on social media, that may have to be adapted to include insecure online channels, especially if you're aware of sort of a convenience path across the common channels. So say you've got well-protected email gateways and domains, but then people are chatting in off-work socials, say like a Facebook chat, or make sure that those are secure and that no important information is being processed through those, as at the moment in remote working, there's a lot of focus on speed and convenience and not necessarily on security and quality. So it's making sure that your awareness program is fit for purpose and focused around the specific issues that your users are facing day to day. And this will be done by revisiting what objectives you have for the campaign. You have to reduce your objectives because there's going to be less bandwidth for you to achieve your aims, and less relevant risks for you to address. But looking at that objective scope and requirements, and understanding how they've changed for you specifically, is key for that to land properly with your users. One of the other things we recommended is to set aside dedicated channels for discussion of network issues, security issues, and have a centralized forum to allow users to engage with the security of their specific space. And that's how you're also going to encourage reporting of phishing scams and incident responses and possible breaches in this time when comms is king, in terms of you need to hear early and you need to hear quickly about what your organization is threatened by. And finally, as well, we'd say that it's important that, as I'm sure senior leaders in your organization have been communicating clearly and frequently about the changes to the business and how it's operating, if there is any bandwidth now to place a security awareness message through that top level figurehead or sort of weekly briefing, then there's a good opportunity there for you to properly place that high on the agenda for your new working. As we shift into this, possibly more people will be continuing to work from home over the coming years, and identifying that awareness is still going to be a core value to your business, by having that senior role model use that channel, will be a very powerful message in convincing people that security awareness at home is an important issue. Ultimately, the aim is to continue to promote the right behaviors, and it just needs there are adaptations you'll need to make to ensure that you are not continuing security awareness as normal, because that will fall flat in this heightened workspace. The other thing I mentioned earlier is the most successful piece of advice we've been giving out is to provide users with a secure at home checklist. It gives you data back on what they've been doing to protect themselves in their office there, but it's also giving them palpable actions that they can take away and do and feel secure for it. So that might be, for example, one about, well, actually, I'll go through some, when I get to the risks, I'll establish what that checklist should look like, but it helps people establish the why behind security practices and policies as they can see the change in the status quo and the real actions off the back of an awareness program. And it establishes that you have seen a change in the way they are working, and as such, they'll respond positively to the change that you have made, and it'll be more relevant and consistent and current as you've updated it. So, what does one of these checklists look like? In the awareness matters we're most consistently concerned about whilst people are at home, that's likely to be things like Wi-Fi security, software updates. Now that the devices are out of IT's hands, are they consistently being pushed and completed? Social engineering and new scams emerging around the pandemic and other social issues. Then the use of a VPN, the use of password managers or poor passwords, and other things like personal devices and reporting incidents, as well as the increased phishing threat. So with Wi-Fi security, we've recommended that people ensure that the Wi-Fi is using the strongest encryption available, that the routers have disabled WPS to stop people from just being able to hit a button and their neighbors join, making use of MAC address filters. And these are things that may initially seem beyond the scope of some of your employees' technical abilities. However, with the change in remote working, people are happy to take more control over their internet and their home networking. And I think if you provide the guides and the structured steps and this checklist to address that and make those changes, you will have empowered them to step up and become part of your defense, part of your defenses and your network security. Also, things like changing the default username and passwords on the router is important. So by following those steps, they'll hopefully become a little bit more self-reliant and directly applying their new information and cybersecurity skills. Social engineering, you need to update your users on what they're likely to see and what scams you're using. If you can leverage any reported current attacks that you have seen recently into a newsletter or a blog post that you can circulate to people, that will probably be the best way to not only demonstrate that the risk has gone up. I've seen some crazy stats like phishing has gone up by 663% around medical scams since the pandemic broke out, and other scary facts. But it's a feeding frenzy of misinformation and distrust. And if you can reassure your users and be that consistent voice of what risks are important to mitigate and how do we go about them, and give them the tools which to combat them, then that's a great step in the right direction for their home security. Otherwise, in the top risks, phishing still a key concern. Device security, much of the time under normal conditions, a great deal of sensitive information is stored locally and on the machine the user's working on. And more, now that that's outside of the office network, we need to ensure that people are using VPNs, that are saving them on a server that is protected and owned by the company, and ensure that those devices are properly encrypted and password protected, that they are not unattended, that everyone is clear that no family member or flatmate or other person should have access to that device, and avoiding particularly sensitive or unnecessary information being locally stored there. And ideally, having a remote wiping capability in place is another concern for security at home. The the lessons learned in lockdown and whilst people are working from home will carry over into whatever the future looks like for your organization. And I think that leveraging a clearly communicated argument made from at home and then reiterating it upon return will be incredibly powerful. That you are making that you have a mature security awareness campaign that changes and reacts to stimulus and doesn't just continue as normal. Even consider getting them to detail the make and model of devices and the different things they're using at home will give them an awareness of what they are using. I've got a question in here. The reference checklist, is it fair to expect individuals to take more responsibility? Does the employer need to provide basic IT skills, updating software, firmware, and browser configurations? If so, how could this be done at scale? So is it fair to expect the individuals to take more responsibility? They already have been given ownership or sort of custodianship of that device. And whilst it is IT's job to own those, a lot of the technical makeup of the device, the more that we can educate our users to take control, the more confidence they will have and the more that security will stay in their mind when they're going through actions that could put the company at risk. I think, yes, in terms of the awareness collateral that we are providing as security awareness training providers, as well as the additional things that our clients put in place themselves, there are those guides step by step to help people protect, to make sure that the settings are all correct. A lot of the settings will be handled remotely. But when we're talking about things like Wi-Fi security, these are things that are going to help protect not only them, but their family, and they're the easiest things to convince people to do. So fairness, it's often can be seen as a benefit you're providing to the end user to help protect their family and their home from their own personal data. So if you're helping them, it's not necessarily a burden if you're asking them to increase the security on their home Wi-Fi device. And I think if you can give people skills and they can come away feeling like they understand the why and the what, then you've done a better job changing behavior than just telling them that something's dangerous. Been done at scale, host the resources on your local intranet or deliver them through CBT, computer-based training, and make sure that you collect data on how people are engaging with those resources and if they have been a good use of time, and work out what works for you. That's something that we touched upon in one of our previous webinars around maturing your awareness campaign and getting it to the stage at which it is able to respond to stimulus and outside threats. And I think that this upheaval has been one of those. And if you can empower your users to be more technically savvy and responsible, then you've done them a favor rather than a responsibility. Obviously, there will be users who don't believe it's their job, and that's something you have to work around with the help of IT and comms. But the ethos at Hut 6, at least, has always been to respect the intelligence and time of the user to understand why and what risks they're exposed to and why they're doing it. Thank you for that question. And I suppose that brings us nicely on to the sort of the last of the main risks that we are going to try and address at security awareness at home. So we had social engineering, we had device security and Wi-Fi security. Those are the top three from our perspectives that are good topics to focus on when you're addressing security awareness at home. But phishing attacks. Early doors, we had quite a few clients asking us, are we supposed to phish our users during this time? Because we may be causing them undue stress or using up the small amount of patience they will have preserved during this time of stress, as I spoke about at the beginning of the webinar. The answer is the attackers don't really care. They've increased their phishing attacks the moment that things took a turn for the worse and chaos ensued. So there's a good argument to be made for continuing because it's better to fail safe. However, often we advised in the first few months, at least, that advice has now changed, but we advised to stay away from emotionally stressful attacks, as the data you'll be collecting is not worth the irritation you cause your user. So we put a lot of them on hold, and it varied from organization to organization, but as people who are going through stressful times and are forced to start work from home, get their laptops and monitors set up, and they're finding a mouse and getting their emails online and having access to the server again, will have a low patience for a gotcha moment of, oh, I've been caught out, I feel like an idiot, or, oh, I've been caught out, I better learn for next time. The better way to do it is to inform people about the scams they will face in a very immediate and upfront way and a regular basis, so they are aware of phishing, pause the phishing simulations, and then resume them when you've got to a point that people are educated on what scams they'll be facing, and at a point where you are happy to measure people's susceptibility based upon that. I think there's in all awareness campaigns, they're quite total and quite other media than just training or just phishing simulation needs to be used to convince people to change their behavior, and you need to give them all the opportunity and the motivation in the world. And those points will be known to you as you have a touchstone and interact with your users. But also bring that to a committee that you have, bring that to your working group and to your cyber champions and advocates across the organization who can help you deliver that awareness campaign, because they may have a better temperature check for your organization than an arbitrary sort of guess at how they're feeling. But yeah, I think, phishing simulations, they provide a real world measurement of how people interact with those threats. They give you intel on what works and what doesn't, and whether or not your training is targeted at the right things. We stay away from sensitive topics all the time in our phishing simulations. We intentionally don't target real world crisis issues, as they cause mental health issues and stress and worry, and they lose your users' trust. But if and that's something that you should continue into something like coronaviruses, to avoid that that too close to the bone, too poignant a simulated attack, as you use up their trust and faith in you as a security team. But always be open, and as I said, in the era of COVID, content needs to be authentic and needs to be very, very honest and not too polished or cheesy. So in those moments, bring that into your comms and explain clearly to your users why you're doing what you're doing, and tell them maybe we're putting phishing simulation on hold because we don't want to cause distress. And suddenly you've turned a conundrum into a positive around that. Great. Are there any more questions from what I've addressed thus far? I've been through the what's the current state of affairs? How should I adapt my security awareness program? Which topics are the most vital? And should we be running phishing simulations? Is there anything else that people think that I should be addressing with security awareness at home? I'd love to address those questions. Otherwise, I'll whack up on screen a poll for what we should do our next webinar on, and you can vote in that. Thankfully, I think we only got one moment of drilling, and I don't think my desk was vibrating too much, so we're fine. Okay, I'm going to launch the polling now. It says, what webinar topic would you like to see next? What security awareness metrics should I be using? Can gamification in training be done right? Creating an ambassador program for security awareness. So that's about how do we get supporters across the organization for a security awareness campaign, and also the value of phishing simulations. So that's a further discussion on where phishing simulations can be most applied and what metrics you should be taking from it, and what actions you should be doing. Okay, so we've got quite a few votes in for the metrics question. Okay, I think I'll publish those results there. So what security awareness metrics should I be using is going to be the next topic. In that, I think what we'll focus on is core measurable points at which you can say your awareness program has been a success in reducing human risk, and then we'll explore new avenues and new points of data that you can collect and they may not be in the traditional sense what you expect a metric to be, or even they may not be related directly to security awareness, but something that's a measurable outcome of the shift in culture you might achieve. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope to see you next month. Great. There's no more questions. And right, thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice rest of the afternoon.